Hello, everyone. I'm Ginny Gentles, host of Escaping Your Government Assigned School here at IWN and director of the Education Freedom Center at IWF, also host of Students Over Systems, a new podcast by IWF. I'm so happy to be joined here today by Randan Steinhauser. Randan is a returning guest at Escaping Government Assigned School. We talked last year about homeschooling and your experience with your 4 children in Texas, and we hinted likely be a big school choice push in the upcoming Texas legislative session. So Randan is a longtime education reform advocate, a school choice advocate, and she's working with a number of organizations and directly with parents in Texas to spread the education freedom message. Welcome, Randan. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back.
All right, so Randan, you, as I mentioned, you are a education reform advocate, an education freedom advocate, and you come at this from a perspective of a parent, but also somebody who knows the policy and knows the political layout in Texas. Let's start with the little bit of the background. There's been a push for education freedom in Texas before, right?
Yes, in fact, this year marks 10 years since I moved home to Texas from Washington, D.C. I was working in D.C. And working all over the country, really pushing for educational freedom. And my husband and I decided to move home to Texas. And I naively thought, okay, well, if places like Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin can have school choice, certainly Texas can too. And again, that was a decade ago. So here we are at, I would say, the height of our efforts to push for universal education savings accounts. And it's been a long road. Obviously, it was happening before I moved home 10 years ago. But I've been involved in this effort here in Texas for about a decade.
Well, education savings accounts, that's something that we're hearing about more than ever before. Arizona expanded their existing education freedom accounts. They call them FAs, I guess, instead of ESAs, last year, so that all 1.1 million K-12 students can participate in that education savings account or education or ESA program. And then just this year, Utah, Iowa, Arkansas, and now Florida have passed universal or near universal ESA programs. What are ESAs? Why are we talking about these so much now?
Yeah. Well, education savings accounts are really the way for parents to customize their child's education. So whereas before we've seen a rise over the last 25 years of vouchers, which are direct payments from the government to an individual private school, education savings accounts are more innovative in the reality that they allow parents to customize how those dollars are spent. So they go into an account that is managed by the parents. They can be used entirely for an accredited private school tuition. However, why I love them as a homeschooling mom is because they can be used on a variety of expenses. So my children are in a 2-day-a-week private school. I could use part of their ESA for that tuition. I could also use part of their education savings accounts for things like curriculum, tutoring, therapy, online learning. And so it allows the parent, who we would argue knows their child better than anyone, to really customize their education in a way that brings together and blends together a variety of different educational environments.
So Texas already has a little bit of school choice in the form of charter schools, and that's something that not all states have. I think about 45 states have charter school laws. Some, like Virginia, where I live, have a charter school law, but it's terrible. And there are only like maybe 7 charter schools, and they're very limited as far as the flexibility that they're given. Why did Texas stop at charters when it came to offering choice for families?
You know, we do have a very robust charter network in Texas. I'm very proud of that. However, we know that it's not enough. Just last week, the Texas Charter Schools Association released the new waitlist numbers. We have over 60,000 students who are on a charter school waitlist. 60,000 students across the state of Texas who are currently in a school that is not working for them. So I would argue that we've had a very healthy debate around charter schools. I think that more people are starting to realize that charter schools are not private schools. They are publicly funded They are publicly funded schools. They just offer parents a different avenue for their children. So there are still efforts for equal funding for charters. They are still not given the same amount as the neighborhood schools, which traditionally are underperforming when it comes to public charter schools. And I think, one of the really interesting things about this overall debate is really opening up avenues to a variety of choices. So if you're a parent, right now we have a huge conversation happening in Houston ISD. It's being taken over by the state for consistently failing year after year these students. 10 years ago, I want to just jump back to that. 10 years ago, I was in Houston knocking on doors, organizing parents to come to the Capitol. Those parents, 10 years later, still have children stuck in failing schools. So while they might be able to get on a charter school waitlist in Houston, they're still stuck. It's not enough to just offer public school choice. We have to give those parents control of their dollars so that they can go elsewhere outside of the government run system and find an educational environment that works for their child.
Well, I'm sure 10 years ago and then again today, you're hearing promises. Well, just wait, we'll fix it, right? We have all these plans. We can use our federal supplemental ESSER funding, and we can try this new educational fad, and we will fix the public system. We should invest in public schools and the public system. That seems to be the pushback that school choice advocates have always gotten for the last, you mentioned, 25 years. It's been over 30 years in the case of Wisconsin, some of the early places for private school choice programs. Parents don't have 10, 20, 30 years. Students don't have 10, 20, 30 years. We do have to have a sense of urgency and move forward with proven strategies, including expanding education freedom. So let's talk about what the particular proposals are in Texas. You guys started your legislative session earlier this year, and I believe there's more than one proposal floating around out there.
Yeah, there are actually quite a few. We've had some real champions here in Texas stand up, and in the past also, right? We just haven't been able to get it across the finish line. So we've seen a few universal education savings accounts, meaning that every child would qualify on day one. I want to give a shout out to both Senator Angela Paxton and Senator Mays Middleton, both of whom have proposed a universal education savings account. There is also Senate Bill 8, which is being discussed right now. Last week, we had a very long day at the Capitol, having a hearing on that particular bill. It is a very large it would be a very large program. However, there are a few regulations that would require you to have pre-existing enrollment in a public school or entering kindergarten. At this point, what we've seen when it comes to educational freedom is that every child deserves to have this same opportunity. So we are pushing for universal. This is everyone from our coalition to parents who came to the Capitol and said, I want my child to be included also. So I think that we are on the right path, but our message to lawmakers is do not exclude any child from this program. We want every single student to have that same opportunity.
Well, I can imagine that you're getting some pushback from the authors of the Senate Bill 8 and others in the community and in the discussion that, well, look, in other states, they didn't start universal, with the exception of the programs that were passed this year that I mentioned earlier. They started small, they started limited, they were focused on serving certain populations of students, and often there was a prior requirement for public school enrollment, and then they grew over time. What's different now? Why should they start fully universal in Texas?
I would say that those programs started small because elected officials were playing politics with kids' future, quite frankly. And we know that you can go big and go universal, and our kids deserve it. Our government run education system is so archaic in the delivery model and the way that kids are getting their education. There is no reason for us to keep kicking this can down the road, waiting a little bit longer, spending a little bit more money. The system is broken. And so I would say that it is time for big, bold action. It is time for our lawmakers to recognize that every single child learns differently and that the sky is the limit when it comes to educational innovation and opportunity. So, I'm just not one to sit back and say, let's just wait and see, or let's start small, because again, we know that there are parents who are desperate for another educational option. We know that there are children who are going to thrive when given the freedom to move beyond a coercive education system into one that is focused on choice and innovation and creativity. And so I think that now is the perfect time for Texas to enact a bold universal education savings account, because other states are doing it and there's no reason for Texas to stay behind.
So you had the hearing last week. I believe there was a hearing on Wednesday, and then on Tuesday there was a rally. And the governor has been very engaged in the rally and then also in meetings with parents and events with parents around the state. Is that something that's different than last time too? You've got leadership from the governor who's really behind education freedom.
You know, I think that he has turned up the volume on this conversation. So I will say Governor Abbott from day one in office has been a supporter of private school choice. 8 years ago, I planned a very large rally at the Capitol. We had thousands of people on the South Steps here in Austin. And guess who spoke? Governor Greg Abbott, calling for educational freedom for families. And so I think that one big difference, and I think we may have talked about this on our during our last conversation, is that momentum coming from the grassroots, coming from parents in a very organic way. So while Governor Greg Abbott has, I would argue, always been a proponent of the policy, I think he is now recognizing we cannot wait any longer. And he's hearing that from families, he's hearing that from parents. And so that grassroots movement is so organic, and parents are quite frankly fed up, right? I mean, this has been building, this frustration has been building since COVID and even before, but it really unleashed the potential for parents to see, A, my kid's not learning, or they're learning things I'm not happy with, or their mental health is struggling, or I just want to spend more time with them, or I want another educational option. I think those messages are being delivered loud and clear to Governor Greg Abbott, and he is now making it a priority. He's traveled all across the state in partnership with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, hosting parent empowerment nights, and they have been sold out crowds every single time. And so I think for him, he sees that momentum. Again, he's been there on policy, and now he really feels the pressure coming from parents in a very good way, in a very positive way.
Well, Randan, you and I have been around for a while in this movement. So the fact that you're talking about consistently sold out events around the state, we know that's significant. It can be hard to get parents to come to things. They're busy, they're distracted. You're not exactly sure the effective way to let them know that events are happening. These parents obviously are clamoring for the opportunity to be part of this education freedom movement and to be making sure that their voices are heard. You mentioned COVID is one of the COVID, the closures, the realization that their children weren't learning. These are some of the things that are fueling it. Is there something else behind this that has them more engaged than ever before?
I think there's so many different things happening right now. I mean, we look at it nationally. We see the overall arrogance towards parents. I mean, the fact that we have to have a parents' bill of rights in our country, and that these are being pushed at the state level to just put into law that parents know best, that parents are the ultimate authority on their children, right? So we have this real tension building in our country right now around parental rights, educational freedom. And I think a lot of it, again, kind of the curtain was pulled back during COVID, and we saw some of the outlandish curriculum that's being pushed when our kids aren't even learning to read and write and do arithmetic. They're more focused on their feelings and their identity and these woke progressive Marxism curriculum that are being pushed in our government schools. We know it is happening, right? Anyone who says that's not happening in our state is just blind to the reality that this is being pushed not just from the top down, but from the bottom up, from educators bringing this ideology into their classrooms. At the same time, we also see organizations like the Texas Association of School Boards or the National Association of Secondary School Principals. You go and you look at these union websites where they make recommendations for their teachers or their union members. I am astonished when they tell their teachers the number one thing you can do to make your classroom a safe space is to make sure you have a pride flag. The number one thing you can do to protect your students' individuality is to ensure you're using their chosen pronouns. This is top front and center of these organizational websites and their overall philosophies when it comes to educating our kids. So I think as parents start to dig into who's educating their children, who's making the public policies at the school level or the campus level, they're starting to say, whoa, 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 hold on a second. This not only doesn't match our family's values, but my kid's not learning or my kid's not happy. So there's this tension that's being built. At the same time, I think we all recognize that we are living in an age where technology and innovation allows for us to do things differently. And again, we have an archaic, outdated government run system right now when it comes to public education. And I think that more than anything, parents just want the freedom to help their child and guide their child to have an education that meets their individual needs, but also brings them joy.
All right, so we've talked about some of the forces at work here that are behind and working together to ensure that expanded education freedom and recognition that students need to be at the center and parents need to have a voice, that all these things are happening in the state capitol. Those of us outside of state capitals really can't know what's going on. Like, you have to be there to understand kind of what's happening. So we talked about some of the state legislative leaders who are behind this, and the bills, the governor, the parents' interests. Are you seeing other things at play here as far as some of the institutions that are generally rising up and are very powerful voices that drown out the parents in this discussion? Is there anything different happening there? Because from what I understand from past years in Texas, the rural superintendents, the various education associations that defend the K-12 cartel, that defend the way things have always been done, they have the ear of the politicians, and parents and students and other needs are drowned out. Is there any dynamic shifting that's going to change that?
I would say it's the same as always when it comes to the opposition. I mean, I think that it's pretty clear they feel the change also. They can feel that organic pressure mounting from parents. They see the way that, again, Governor Greg Abbott has turned up the volume on this issue. They see that. I think they're getting really desperate. I will tell you, I live in a very affluent suburb here in Austin, and they are running billboard ads in my community where 95% of the students out here go to public schools and likely still would, even if they had an ESA. But they're running billboards saying vouchers are going to kill your Friday night lights, or every public schools serve every child, or public schools are a good choice. They are running ads in my community because they know that this is one of those suburbs where parents are generally happy with their government school. But at the same time, we see in our rural communities, in our urban communities, where our schools are perpetually failing in our urban communities, and then in our rural communities where there may just be one school and the superintendent is making $225,000 a year, and there's a protectionism that's happening, right? They want to protect that status quo because they don't want the competition. So again, you have urban, suburban, and rural, and there's all these competing factors. And so I think that there is an effort by those special interest groups to protect the status quo, to demand for more money, just give us a little bit more time, right? They want to find all of these different excuses for not seeing the outcomes, when ultimately we know when you give parents the freedom, when you give the consumers the freedom of movement and choice to take their dollars where they believe they are best spent, we're going to see outcomes improve. We've seen it in other states as well. So I think it's the same old characters. We are used to fighting this battle with folks that are very well funded, from the teachers unions to the special interest group, the advocacy groups that are very well funded in Texas to go against parental choice. So again, I think the tide is turning and the momentum is in favor of more freedom and less government.
Well, we have a growing number of IWN members who live in Texas. And so as we wrap up, what message would you like to take to them? What would you encourage them to do if they are interested in expressing support for education freedom, and kind of what's the timeline that they should expect for these bills to be discussed?
Yeah. Okay. So first and foremost, I love the name of this podcast because it's Escaping Your Government Assigned School. So my first message to anyone who's listening to this, who has a little bit of a desire to exit the government schools or do things a little bit differently, even without the ESA, my message to you is take the risk. You are never going to get that time back with your child. You're never going to get that freedom to just learn alongside them. So if you have any desire to home educate, to do things differently, find a hybrid model, go to a micro school, virtual learning. Take the time, research your options, but pull your kid out, get them out of that government system, and focus on learning alongside them, because you'll never regret it. So that's my first message. My second message is, if you are interested in helping to specifically push for an education savings account in Texas, we need you to call your House members. Last week we had our Senate hearing. I think we feel pretty good. Our message to the Senate is universal, universal, universal. Every single child, no carve-outs, no exceptions. In the House, they are going to need to hear from their constituents that we want educational freedom. So definitely make the call. Stay engaged online. Find your members on Twitter and social media, tweet and post and tag them in your support for educational freedom. Be a part of the conversation and figure out, how you can come to Austin and have your voice heard as well. That's really, really powerful.
Great. And then the timeline for that, I know some state legislative sessions, they're done. You blink and they're done. Virginia was done ages ago. Texas is different. You meet every other year for longer periods, right?
We meet every other year. Our session technically ends June 1st. We do have a pretty short time frame. However, one of the most encouraging things that we've heard over the last couple of weeks is Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick saying, we will call a special session for as long as it takes. So if you have summer plans, get rid of them, because we will come back this summer and call a special session until we have education freedom in Texas. So very encouraging words. That doesn't mean we don't want to get it done this session right now that we're in. But again, it's a priority for our leaders in Texas, and I know it's a priority for parents. So have your voice heard, contact your legislator, tell them we want universal education savings accounts.
Wonderful. Well, Brandon, how can people listening to this find more information about what's going on in Texas?
Yeah, there is a broad coalition. There's an organization called Liberty for the Kids that I think is doing a great job of communicating out with email marketing and social media. As I mentioned, the Texas Public Policy Foundation is really helping to lead this effort as well. I work with Young Americans for Liberty, yaliberty.org. You can also follow them on social media to figure out how they're getting involved in pushing for universal, every single child. There's a broad coalition. And we would love to have any parent get involved to use their voice to push this effort.
Great. Well, Randan Steinhauser, thank you so much for being one of our first return guests to Escaping Your Government Assigned School. And thank you for giving us the good news about what's happening in Texas.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope listeners found this conversation encouraging and inspiring. Please tune in every other Tuesday for our Escaping Your Government Assigned School conversations. We'll continue to talk with parents, with school choice advocates, and with the creators of education freedom options for your child. Thank you so much for listening.